This right here, ladies and gentlemen, is a portable speaker like you've never seen it. Two Chungus speakers and a Megachonk subwoofer with a matching passive radiator in an enclosure only slightly bigger than a shoebox. This is a 400 watt monster powered by two dinky Milwaukee batteries, and it might just be the most bombastic Milwaukee speaker ever made. Stick around because I'm going to show you how I made it. Let's back up a bit, shall we? A few months ago I was in the market for a new portable speaker for work after my old one had been nicked out of a work ute, and I kept seeing these bloody Milwaukee speakers everywhere. They have a few different models floating around, and while some of them output roughly 40 watts of power, that simply just isn't enough for me. After all, their speakers cost upwards of $300 for most models, and if I'm spending that kind of money, I'd prefer to have something that rates higher than 3 stars on their own fucking website. So I decided to have a crack at making my own portable Milwaukee speaker. To begin with, I needed to find something that's suitable to build an enclosure out of. I don't want to buy material for this project, so I need to find something in the house that I can use instead. Cats are quite dense, but unfortunately just a little bit too small. A dog would be a good size, and it also comes with its own woofer, but it would probably make the speaker smell bad. In the end, I decided to use something that wouldn't put up a fight if I cut it in half. A drawer from the chest in my room. This may seem like an odd choice, but this drawer is pine, which is soft and easy to work with. Hardwood is expensive, and since I know I'll fuck this up at least a few times, I'd prefer to not waste money on something that I'll end up destroying. The first thing that I needed to do was to create the box. I'm going to be using two 4-inch mid-range woofers which will sit at the front and a 5-inch woofer on the side for the base, so I marked up the width of the box, making sure that it would be big enough to fit these components in, as well as allowing for space inside the box so that I could give each speaker its own internal chamber. After that, I began chopping up the drawer with a grinder. Now you should definitely never use a grinder to cut wood because it takes forever and the sawdust will clog up and eventually destroy it, but I can't afford to buy a circular saw at the moment, so let me know in the comments if you want to buy me one. Thanks to ancient math nerds like Archimedes and Euclid, cutting one side of a drawer means you're only left with 4 out of the required 6 faces to form a rectangle. That's probably good enough for something like a bookshelf, but I'm not trying to build a bookshelf, I'm trying to build a speaker, and to build my speaker, unfortunately, I'll need all 6 faces. I cut an extra length of wood from the corpse of what was once a useful piece of furniture to create a backside. You'll notice that instead of gluing the wood together, I'm just putting in screws, and that's because I didn't have any glue on me, and I'd already had a few too many beers to drive to Bunnings. What I did have was a whole Tupperware container full of random screws just begging for a tight hole to nestle in, and so I obliged them. I mean, who am I to deprive a screw of purpose? The drawer has this really weird, thick veneer over it, which gives the wood a kind of ugly, dark colour, and I had more of a vintage look in mind, so the veneer had to go. To do this easily, I had to bring out the flappy disc. After giving the back a quick once over, I used the flappy disc to bevel the edges. The screws got in the way a little bit, but every now and then using the wrong tool for the job turns into a good thing because this flappy disc is actually made for metal and not wood. The screws didn't put up much of a fight, but the veneer on the box was stubborn, and it took a significant amount of sanding with both the grinder and some shitty Bunnings sandpaper to get it to an even somewhat acceptable level. Fortunately though, I'm an alcoholic, so I don't mind staying at home alone on a Friday night sinking beers and rubbing a box for hours. In fact, I'm pretty used to it. I usually do that once a week with your mum anyway. Unfortunately, the sun rose the next morning and the first thing that I needed to do was to cut the holes for the speakers. I did have one problem though. I had no idea where the holes needed to go. This kind of math would ordinarily be done in the design phase of the project, but since I didn't design or plan anything, I now had to spend time reverse engineering something that didn't yet exist because I couldn't be bothered to do anything properly in the first place. Bingo! The cutout diameter for the two front speakers is 92mm, just like my penis. You should always wear safety glasses when you're drilling, especially if it's with cheap bits like these, but if you don't have safety glasses, just make sure you close your eyes really tight and pray that the dull blades of these crappy hole saws don't break into pieces and put one of your eyes out. It's time to drill a hole for the port. The port allows the woofer to push air backwards, and there's a formula for how long and wide it should be, but I've already done the math, and if you don't know what the formula is, then it's more your fault for being stupid than it is mine for being too lazy to explain it. Fuck. Oh no, that's fucking... Jack, you fucking idiot. I drilled the wrong hole. Instead of giving the subwoofer a port, I've robbed the two front speakers of their ability to move air around, which will make them sound like the music is coming out of a tin can deep inside a cave in Siberia. I wasn't very happy about what I'd done, and for a minute I considered whether or not I should start from scratch, but in the end I thought fuck it, I can't be bothered, and I marked up and drilled another hole. Now it's time to mark out the holes for the battery adapters. On my first undocumented attempt of this, I had the battery adapters arranged so that the batteries would sit vertically against the back of the speaker. That worked really well and there was nothing wrong with it. However, for this I decided that for some reason working well just won't do, and I sat them horizontally instead. This will ensure increased stress on the screws holding the battery terminals to the wood, which will cause them to pull out of the wood because of the weight of the batteries over time, which is awesome and definitely something that you want. After diddling the batteries for a bit, I moved on to the front fascia, which is to house two potentiometers as well as a button to control a relay and a Bluetooth reset switch. I pulled this fascia off an old guitar which I found while working at a company called 1-800-GOT-JUNK, where I used to get yelled at a lot by my angry friend Adam. Or Alan. Abraham? I've forgotten his name, but whatever, it doesn't matter. Anyway, I thought the mushroom was cool, but the pickup doesn't work on it, so I've kept it as an ornament until now. Finally, I can put it to use. I'll be using a 12mm on-off switch with an LED from my favourite homoerotic electronics store, which I'll tell you more about later, but for now I've decided to tap out the hole for it in the wood to get a better fit. I also needed to drill a hole for the Bluetooth LED, which I decided to put in the corner because I didn't know where else to put it, and I feel like Bluetooth LEDs are always in the corner anyway. I also made sure to deburr the holes, as wood splinters are known for stabbing things, and just like your grandma's nipples, speakers are extremely easy to pierce. And now it's time for a cheeky bit of timber stain. I've gone with a maple stain made by Feast & Watson, which I pocketed from my local Bunnings. Now, there was no way I was fitting an entire drum of stain in my underpants, so luckily I only needed a small amount from the tiny little bottle to do one coat of the box. While I was waiting for the timber stain to dry, I cut off the internal speaker divider from the base of the drawer and then made sure it got a good look at its dismembered limb so it knew who it was fucking dealing with. I was pretty happy with the tone of the wood after the stain had dried, so I passed go and decided to throw on varnish straight away. I forgot to collect my $200 though, so I had to skimp a bit on the varnish. Now, I don't know what type of varnish this actually is because it came in a tiny bottle from some guy I met in a Taco Bell car park after dark, but he assured me that it was decking varnish and definitely not semen. I gave both the nooks and the crannies a solid coating, after which it was time to once again let it dry and move on to something else. Back to the port. Now, the port needs not only girth, but an appropriate length as well. My port length is 100mm with a diameter of 36mm, and before any of you bastards say it, I'm very well aware that this rectangle of aluminium definitely doesn't have a diameter of 36mm. I just didn't have any pipe on hand, and I'm trying not to spend money. That is, of course, unless it's at my favourite homoerotic electronics store, Gaycar. As a chronically straight man, I just adore this place, and there were a few things I needed from them to make this project go a little bit smoother. A relay so that I can disconnect the batteries with a switch, some copper which with any luck will make my speakers twitch, an LED for which I'll need, well, surely more than one, a dildo, well, what can I say, that's for me, that's just for fun. Next, it was time for the battery adapters to go on the wrong way around. After fitting the first one, I realised that I'd put the holders too close together and the batteries wouldn't fit, so I had to drill another hole about 3 clicks due east of the first two to give myself enough clearance to fit the two of them next to each other. The wires from the battery adapters were too short because I've already used these for the last design of this speaker I'd done. These are power car adapters I got off Amazon for about $19 together. The ad makes them look good, but in reality they're absolutely hideous and they don't do any favours for the classic wood look I'm going for, but for now it'll have to do. The idea is to have the batteries in parallel with each other instead of series. Connecting them in series would double the voltage, but I chose parallel for two reasons. Number one, if the batteries are in series and of different ages and capacities, the weaker one will deplete first since the amplifier will draw current equally across all the cells. As well as that, the amplifier I'm using can operate at a maximum of 39 volts, whereas two fully charged batteries will put out 42 volts, which is probably enough to blow up the amplifier. I could use a buck converter, but I want to try to avoid adding noise into the circuit, and switching converters are notorious for making amplifiers hiss. If I put them in parallel instead, the voltage will stay at a maximum of 21 volts, which is well within my amplifier's specifications, and it'll be a clean DC supply coming from the battery, which hopefully means no hissing. This also means that if I put an empty battery in next to a full battery, the full one will try to dump all of its charge into the empty one, which will also damage the batteries, but I wasn't thinking about that at the time. I just can't stand speakers that hiss, and I wanted to avoid that at all costs. After joining the terminals of the battery holders, I soldered the positive wire to one of the switch pins of a 24 volt relay and the other switch pin to the power connector for the amplifier. It's hard to see here, but I actually fucked up the wiring because I didn't draw a diagram first. Relays rely on magnetic fields generated by a tiny coil that pull a switch closed, but for that to work you need to power the coil as well. This is how it should be wired, and this is how I've done it. After I fixed that, I soldered the other side of the relay coil to the second wire for the switch and then moved on and tried to forget this had ever happened. I put epoxy on the back of the relay and then screwed it into the box so that it wouldn't move around because of the vibrations from the speakers. Now it was time to put on the front fascia. I screwed it on with the precision holes I drilled before I stained the wood, and then was immediately confused because all of a sudden my on-off button didn't fit anymore. To fix that problem, I drilled out the hole and then tapped it so that I could just screw the switch in and then not have to worry about it. After that, it was time to put in the speakers. Now, these speakers are 40 watt RMS 4-inch Dayton drivers, and there's nothing particularly special about them. They'll be getting replaced by something much nicer a little bit later on, but I've made an unfortunate habit of sending screwdrivers through speakers in the past, so these guys will be my good time boys for now. I screwed on the baffles, wary of the graveyard of speakers who died this way sitting next to my knees. Time for the little Bluetooth indicator. I got this guy from Gaycar and I think he looks pretty neat. He's just a little blue LED and a chrome bezel, which should contrast nicely with the wood finish. A recurring problem that I've had for a while is that it's really hard to solder components when you don't have anything to hold them together, and my life at this stage had become an endless battle between me and gravity. To make matters worse, the heat shrink I was using was too big for the wires, but I didn't have anything smaller, so I had to clamp it with my fingies. Because my heat shrink was too big, I decided to use the docking method to make sure my two conductors didn't touch. 1/1, 1/both, and never the twain shall meet. I applied a little bit of epoxy to the hole before I screwed in the Bluetooth LED, and then after that I let it sit for a while to dry. I needed to cover the bare port to make it look less like a glory hole and stop people trying to put their dicks in it, which is genuinely a problem that I have right now. I decided to use a bit of rubber from a cable gland that I had lying around to make the hole look less appetizing. My sacrificial subwoofer here isn't even really a subwoofer at all, but a $50 woofer from Gaycar that can handle frequencies down to about 60 Hz. For reference, that's slightly higher than the frequency of the electricity grid in Australia. The hole I cut out ended up being a wee bit too big for the speaker, but 3 of the screws dug in, so I let the 4th one just dangle in the breeze for now. With all the speakers in and doing everything in no particular order, it was time to move on to wiring the switch to the relay. This was again an enormous pain in the ass, and I should have just taken the switch back out of the box to solder the wires, but for some reason I prefer to do things the hard way. I did however manage to find some small pieces of heat shrink, so at the very least I could do that properly. After installing the barrier between the speakers and the subwoofer, I used a tube of gasket maker to seal the poorly cut pieces of wood. I got the gasket maker from Super Cheap for an old mate fixing my car, and since it makes a horrible gloopy mess in your engine that's impossible to remove with anything except liquid magma, I figured it'd be a perfect candidate for sealing a speaker box. I encouraged the little beads of muck on my forefinger to squeeze themselves into the nooks and crannies of the box. It's really hard not to get this stuff on everything, and if you do get it on something, there's no point in bothering trying to get it off, so I guess my point is don't do what I'm doing here, but it does create a somewhat decent seal. After I put my aluminium tube in place, I covered the gaps in the wood with more muck and then let it all set for a while. Now it's time for the big meat, the raw cheese, the crunchy box. This ain't no amplifier, no, this is the KABD 4100 amplifier from Dayton Audio. Now they're not paying me for this, so I can say that you shouldn't buy this because it's a direct clone of another amplifier that's about $100 cheaper, but it is still a pretty good amp. It has 4 channels that each have an output of 100 watts, but they can be bridged to create a 2.1 configuration, which means 2 speakers and 1 subwoofer. That's pretty well exactly what I need from this. If I can get 200 watts to a subwoofer in a sizable enough enclosure, that should be more than enough to make my tinnitus significantly worse. I chose to solder the speaker wires directly to the fake subwoofer so that they wouldn't accidentally disconnect and short circuit something. I ended up doing this for the front woofers as well, while also ensuring that plenty of solder dropped into the box. I wanted to keep the amplifier inside the box so that I wouldn't have any electronics on the outside of it that would ruin the look of a torn apart cabinet, so I screwed the amp straight into the interior of the box using screws and nylon washers. This kept the amplifier nice and secure without having it bend and break, which circuit boards often enjoy doing. Once it was secured in, I plugged the speaker and power terminals in, and with that it was time to throw in a battery and see if it turned on without exploding. Success. No explosions meant that it was time to put the bass on and test out the speakers. I used more epoxy to attach some strips of rubber that I had lying around to the edges of the box. Now I know you're not an idiot, but just in case I'm wrong and you are an idiot, I did this to create a seal between the aluminium plate that I'll be using for the base and the edge of the wood. I put more rubber on the top of the divider to protect the cables from being chopped up, and then placed a conveniently sized piece of wood on top of that to create a not very airtight seal between the front speakers and the rear woofer. I drilled pilot holes in the wood so that the screws wouldn't crack the wood along the seams, and then I used wood screws with mushroom heads to hold the aluminium tightly to the rubber. And with it all put together, it was finally time to give it its first test drive.
Try to get you off of my mind. I can't forget you. Hard as I try to get you off of my mind.
Okay, so it wasn't a terrible start, but it was a bad one, and there were already a lot of problems with this design. Firstly, the woofer isn't doing a very good job at woofing, and it was struggling to hit those lower frequencies, which was as much an issue with the port design as it was with the woofer itself. Secondly, while there was no hissing coming from the amplifier, because I'd limited it to a maximum of 21 volts, it was only outputting about a third of its full potential, which meant there was an audible crackling at anything above comfortable listening levels. And thirdly, it looked pretty fucked. I liked how the wood had turned out, but if I'm being honest with myself, I probably would not buy this. However, I was confident that this could be fixed, so I ordered more components, but before I could go too far, disaster struck.
Now, tropical cyclone Koji is making landfall in far north Queensland.
It has made landfall in North Queensland.
Has hit North Queensland, bringing damaging winds and torrential rain.
Now, there's also about 20,000 people that are without electricity tonight.
Bowen among the communities which copped it the most. All but deserted.
The wind and the rain have just been howling all Bowen
Suckers.
would be a great place to
Well, okay, so it didn't strike me, but it definitely struck somewhere. To be honest, after putting it all together and testing it, I realised how much work there was still left to be done. So I stopped filming for 3 months and rebuilt the entire thing from scratch. This isn't going to be a very satisfying ending for you, and I'm sorry about that, but this video is almost half an hour long, so surely you just want it to wrap up by now. I know I do. Anyway, what we've got here is Mark III of what I have decided to name the Milwaukee M18 Fuel Pro Super Ultramax Big Booty Bass and More. Let's have a closer look, shall we? This time I did the box properly. The aluminium sheet was rattling constantly, so I decided to glue everything together and make a single sealed enclosure. Unfortunately, that meant putting the electronics on the outside, but I've hidden them in a pair of hideous Jiffy boxes. The batteries are now in series to ramp up the voltage and get maximum power from the amplifier, but to stop them from blowing up the amp, I've added a bank of capacitors here and a series of diodes there to keep both the voltage down and prevent spikes. That also means that if you're really quick, you can hot swap the batteries. To the left is the same Dayton amplifier I was using earlier. I made a shroud for the fan out of the packaging from a kooky Japanese ice cream wrapper to try to funnel outside air into the heatsink. It's not perfect, but it hasn't caught on fire yet, so we're doing okay. On the top are 2 potentiometers, one for the overall volume and one for the bass. But the best part is right around the front, so let's pop this cover back on and turn this puppy around. Right in front here are a pair of 4-inch Ground Zero Radioactive series speakers. Now, there was nothing in the brochure about them actually being radioactive, but I'm kind of hoping they are, because if they aren't, then I don't have any explanation for why my piss turned green earlier. These guys are actually technically 4 speakers, as nestled in the middle of the woofer is a silk dome tweeter for those scratchy high-pitched noises. With an RMS power of about 70 watts each, these 2 speakers are unnecessarily loud when combined with the amp that I'm using. But the real jewel in the crown in this entire project is this stupidly overpowered 5.5-inch subwoofer. This is an Epic series subwoofer, again from Dayton Audio, and as a reminder, they aren't paying me for this, so I'm happy to say that this thing is absolutely fucking insane. This tiny little subwoofer has an RMS of about 200 watts, which for a driver of this size is pretty mind-boggling. And it's paired with a matching passive radiator so that it can move a ton of air without needing a massive enclosure.
Anna, don't you know, you went and took the best of me, you went and took the best of me. Oh Anna, don't you know, well, you went and took the best of me. Now I can't even get to sleep. Pack your bags and we'll leave real soon. Leave tonight and we'll chase the moon until it's day. Until it's day.
And yeah, so that's pretty much it, I guess. This video has taken me about 5 months to make, and I'm terribly sorry for how much of a mess this video has been, but I think it's gone on long enough now. I'm planning on rebuilding this again at some point with even more powerful components, so, you know, stay tuned for that if you want. And I've also got more videos coming out soon. I hope you guys have enjoyed this dog's breakfast of a project, and thank you so much for watching.